Let me chat with one-time Federal Labor Party President, one-time Chief Indigenous Advisor to Prime Minister Tony Abbott and one-time Liberal candidate at the last election. He is, of course, Warren Mundine, joins me on the set now. Hi, Warren.
Hey, going one-time everything.
Yeah, one-time everything. What are you now? What's your current job then?
Well, I'm actually out there working with my sons. They run an electrical business and so I'm helping them out and doing that stuff.
I saw you were out at the Bush Summit last week. Scott Morrison was there, Anthony Albanese, a lot of other people. You're very focused on the drought, the challenges for regional Australia. You're a former mayor of Dubbo, so you're back in your hometown. How tough is it at the moment because of the drought, and how focused are you on some of the irrigation and other issues to try and really boost our agricultural sector?
Look, the drought is probably the worst drought that I've ever seen, and I've seen quite a few droughts, spending most of my life living in rural Australia and working in rural Australia and living in that area, as you just pointed out. I was out there on council of Dubbo and that. It's, I just find it really strange, that we've got this incredible science, we've got incredible technology, we've got amazing things, and you just spoke about the landing on the moon. Well, the technology that got them to land on the moon was less than what's in this phone, and so we can do things for drought-proofing Australia. We just need to get to the table, have a mature adult discussion, and let's start moving forward on it. I found the Bush Summit was something that was so needed to get people in Sydney and Melbourne and other places start focusing back again on the bush because sadly, because the drought's been so long, people were really out there trying to help. It's starting to fall off a bit, and we need to get them out there and help.
But the answer to all this is development, right? The answer
Correct.
to this, drought-proofing the country, is development. How do you do it in this country when no dam has been built for decades? Anytime anyone suggests a dam, there's all sorts of protesters come out. The ABC in recent weeks has spent a lot of taxpayers' money condemning any efforts by government to buy back water licences, and also condemning efforts to spend money on improved irrigation infrastructure. The only two ways you can save water in the Murray-Darling Basin. Then you've got Bob Brown will arc up about wind farms. I mean, you need energy and water to develop agricultural Australia, and there's always a protest on hand to stop these developments.
Well, we've got to just stop listening to the noise. Scott Morrison was right when, look at this last election. It was rural Australia, it was the outer suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne and places like that. They said, hey, we've had a gutful of this. We want jobs. We want to see our economy moving forward. It's now time for the government to grasp that and start moving ahead and start saying, we're going to listen to the silence. We're going to listen to the quiet Australians and that who are out there to build this country and move this forward. I wrote an article for The Telegraph only last week looking at this idea that, if we're going to really be sustainable and be globally competitive into the future, we need to build up our water and deal with the water issues in regional Australia. We need to deal with the energy issues. We need to develop over the Blue Mountains, all these areas, and we need to get more Dubbos and more Woggers and more cities like that out there so that we can grow this country.
But to develop these areas, one of the things you really need is water. Now, sure, we need to use water much more efficiently, but obviously we need to store more water. We need to actually dam more rivers and creeks along the eastern ranges and turn that water to the Western Plains. It's so obvious, but why can't governments do that?
Because they're listening too much to the noise. They're listening to the Twitterati, and they listen to those silly people who go up into Sydney and Melbourne and glue themselves to the roads and all this type of stuff. They're a tiny minority. We have got the science, we have got engineers, we have got technology now that can deal with these issues. We can actually look at how do we get water into these areas and also look after the environment. So it's not about diverting whole rivers and all this type of stuff. So you're trying to fix this environment, but you're destroying that one. It's about how we can go across it. And I'll give an example. Up in Catherine Gorge, we were going through that. through some of those, with those water pours in there during the wet season, it's something like every hour 9 Sydney harbours are coming through that area. Surely we could just pick up an hour or two or something like that. I'm not going to pretend I'm a hydro engineer, but, you know, we need to have that conversation.
Water, yeah.
And then we can use that water in other places. So let's, you know, let's get out there and have this discussion, have this argument, and actually do something, because at the moment no one can tell me that what we're doing at the moment is working.
Now, when are you going back into politics? You've said you'll stick around and go have another crack at Gilmore at the next election. You only narrowly lost it, and there was an independent running, and you'd think the coalition might be well placed if the economy holds up next time around. But in the meantime, there's this chance of a Senate vacancy coming up when Arthur Sinodinos heads off. We know Jim Molan's going to run for that. You're going to put your hand up for it for sure? Well,
that's what the discussions I'm having at the moment, because what I'm thinking about is that using that position to win the South Coast back, because Eden Monero, for instance, the coalition only lost that by 300 votes. So we need to get that. Looking at Gilmore, we need to get that back in. And with the leadership of the government that we're having with Scott Morrison, I believe we can do that. But we need someone focusing on those rural areas and focusing on what the needs of the rural and regional Australia is.
So you're definitely going to put your hand up for that Senate spot?
Well, I'm having the discussions. We're just working our way through it.
Who are you talking to about it?
Well, it's, you know, I talk to a lot of people. You know, I'm a very friendly guy, and then I will go out there. And of course, at the end of the day,
you're sounding it out to see whether.
You're sounding it out, and it's the members who will make this decision. This is about democracy, so it's going to be the members who make that decision, and I believe that I have something to add in regard to dealing with the issues of regional and rural Australia, as well as and working towards a coalition and helping them retain those seats.
Tell me, on Indigenous issues, you were an Indigenous advisor. You headed up the Indigenous Advisory Council for Tony Abbott.
Oh, and also Turnbull
and Malcolm Turnbull. That didn't last too long, though, did it?
It lasted about a year.
Right, yeah.
About the same time as Malcolm.
You were initially sceptical about Indigenous recognition proposal involving a voice. You were won over on it. Do you still think that is a possibility, and a possibility to actually be mentioned in the Constitution? I was very pleased. I know some people are not, and there's a lot of argument going on, but I was very pleased with the Ken Wyatt's speech at the National Press Club. He laid it on the ground. He didn't fluff around. He just said straight out, it's going to be a tough task. It's about all of us working together to get it over the line. Because it's not only about a conversation between ourselves and in Canberra echo chamber. It's about the Australian public. Because why was the 1967 referendum so successful was because they spoke to the Australian public and they got them to get over the line. So my belief at this stage is that we work from the ground up. We get those regions, we get all those people supportive, and then we go from there. There seems to be, in that speech from Ken Wyatt, he seemed to suggest he was all in favour of having some sort of Indigenous voice, but maybe legislated but not mentioned in the Constitution. Even Murray Gleeson, I went to his speech on Thursday night, he laid out a very sober, detailed case in favour of this change, but he says you could actually legislate the voice, have it in operation so people see how it works, before you even put up a referendum to mandate it in the Constitution. Is that feasible?
I think that's probably a good move, actually, because then that starts to really deal with those issues of fear and also to deal with some of the governance issues, because we know what happened previously in the past with ANZSIC and a few other organisations. And so people are still feeling burnt from that. So it's about, we need to win people over. Like, for instance, it's no good just saying this is not a third chamber. You've actually got to say, we've got to approve that. And I think through that process we can put it on a board. I know the Prime Minister said he doesn't want it to be in the Constitution. He's very open to having a legislative approach. I think we should take that opportunity.
I get very frustrated with the arguments about this putting race into the Constitution. A lot of people run this argument. My colleague just an hour ago, we've seen here on Sky News, Warren Mundine, saying this, that it's divisive because it puts race into our Constitution. Well, there are a number of mentions of race in the Constitution. Now, these reforms would get rid of those. It's actually about giving Indigenous people a say over their rights, and they already have clear rights different to the rest of the country thanks to native title legislation. And there's an important difference, isn't there, between race and being an Indigenous person with those rights? Yeah,
well, I'll give you a novel approach to these things. All Australians, when you're talking about, like we just spoke about regional and rural Australia, region and rural Australia want to be at that table. If you're talking about developments in the cities and that, the people in those suburbs want to have a voice and be at that table. Well, this is what Aboriginal people are saying, and I think it's a pretty common sense thing. When you're going to do something to a group of people in Australia, then shouldn't they be listened to? Shouldn't they have that conversation? And that's what I believe. That we do it for everything else. We do it for developments. We do it for farmers. We do it for everyone else. So why don't we do it for Aboriginals?
How optimistic are you? When you think about the history of Indigenous affairs in this country, some successes, a lot of failures. We know ATSIC, which you mentioned before, was a terrible failure. It had a lot of money it was handing out. No one would ever do that again. It became very corrupted. We've had all manner of Indigenous organisations put up and fall apart and fall by the wayside. We've had a lot of informal advisory bodies. It had a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of wasted money. How optimistic would you be about a voice somehow cutting through all that and being more effective?
Well, there's two levels that I see it operating. At the regional level, through the native title process, another process where people have to come and sit down with Aboriginal people and go for that. We need to develop that governance a lot better, so you don't have situations like you had with James Price Point and Adani and other places where the Greens were able to find someone and pull them out. And the other, so we need to fix that up, and that's where you'll get the development, that's where you get the jobs, that's where you get businesses operating. And at the other level, you're having Indigenous input into policy, into things that will affect them in a lot of certain ways. And of course, we're not talking about 20 years ago or 30 years ago. You've got an incredible leadership that's coming through, and it's educated, it's smart, it's articulate, and I think we need to pull more of them into the conversation.
Now, I know you love your rugby league. Yeah. I know you love your round ball football as well, but you also know your Aussie rules pretty well. Yeah. Tell me what you think of the Adam Goodes scenario, which has been reanimated through a documentary of late, and a lot of people are talking about it as an example of blatant racism around Australia directed onto someone on the footy field. Yeah.
Well, look, I'll say it up front. I'm a friend of Adam's, and we're very close. It was just that last year of his career was just such a tragedy that a great footballer who had achieved so much and done so much and won a couple of Brownlows and a couple of premierships and that last year was just totally so destructive to him and him personally, and that issues that he had, those mental issues and everything that went with it. Look, it was just a total tragedy how it happened. This idea that it's just a pure racist thing, I don't agree with. I could imagine what players like Polly Farmer and Doug Nicholls back when he played for Fitzroy, and actually that's a name for the past.
And one of my great heroes, the Sturt champion Michael Graham.
Oh, Michael Graham, another great player.
So many great Indigenous players going way back.
And so a whole lot of things come together. This is my reading of it, and it was just a very sad part of the history of the game, and that. A great footballer was like that, and it caused so much, and it was really sad that he couldn't come back and do that, around the oval for the players.
For the grand final. It's got to be repaired somehow. Let's just stay on this for a moment. I want to show you speaking of tremendous Indigenous players, one of the all-time greats, Gavin Wanganeen, former Port Adelaide player, also, of course, played for Essendon in Melbourne, also won a Brownlow medal. Here's what he said after the documentary was screened last week on Channel 10.
The thing that stood out for me was just seeing how alone Adam was and for how long it went on for, the booing, 3 years. Looking back on it and watching the film, you certainly see it in a different light. But his resilience showed out. I just really felt for Adam.
Yeah, I think it's a really complex issue, Warren. It really pains me because, as you say, Adam Goodes was an absolute champion in every respect of the word, and 2 times Brownlow medalist, an absolute icon of the game, especially for Sydney. Started his footy in South Australia as well. He certainly wasn't booed initially because of any racial issues. Some players get booed because opposing teams don't like them, because they're a bit demonstrative, all of that. But he did get involved in Indigenous politics. That's his right, of course, but there was a lot of politics brought onto the footy field, and then those various events. But I suppose what really pained me, and I'll never forget driving out here one night, actually, to do my Sunday night show, and I rang an Aboriginal friend of mine from South Australia. She loves her footy. She's not a Swan supporter. She's an Adelaide Crows supporter. But I asked her about...
Well, some people have their fun.
Yeah, they do. But I just asked her, do you think this is racist to get us out? And she was almost weeping when she said to me, why don't they just stop, And that's what I thought. When it got to that stage, when everyone could see that racism was at play, and there was a feeling of racist taunt, then why didn't crowds just back off?
Yeah, that's the tragedy of it. That they should have actually did back off. They should have stopped going there, because just week after week after week after week, and it went on for so long, and you could see the effect that it was having. And that I think people just needed to back off and say, give this bloke a break and let him finish off the year and finish his career. But it just got worse and worse and worse. In fact, when the AFL come out and said, please stop, they did more.
That's the trouble. They did more damage. Yeah. And he and Michael O'Loughlin are still doing fantastic work together.
They're great people. Off the field and on the field, they're 2 of the funniest blokes I've ever met. They've got a great sense of humour, and they work really hard for kids out there in the schools and education and stuff. And also they're in business, and they're really good icons and mentors for young Indigenous kids and all Australians in regard to how they've gone on and done great things.
Well, Mickey O himself, what a lazy 300 games of AFL footy, a couple of champions, and they do great work. They deserve our support. And it's an ugly conversation we're having, but it's a lot more complicated than saying all the supporters were racist. I can give you that much, but certainly most people involved in footy have got nothing but the utmost respect for Adam Goodes.